continuing on in our introductory remarks in Genesis, Exposition 113. We are working today on the background to the book, and I think we're probably going to go ahead of ourselves. I said I wasn't going to talk about the authorship because that's the paper that you're supposed to do. In synthesis. Right?
You could be wrong.
So I'll be giving you notes on that later, but I'm not going to discuss it now. Okay? As far as the date of writing of the events, the date of writing of the book of Genesis. Let's see in your notes. Author. Title.
Course outline. Background of the book.
And this is all under Roman numeral 1, background to the book. Did I not give you this? Did I not run out copies for you? So, capital C, the date of writing. I guess that all depends on who wrote it, doesn't it? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the critics say, and I'm getting this from Unger, that the Yahwistic writer of the higher critical theory, the Yahwistic or the Jehovistic writer, wrote about 850 BC, 9th century before Christ. According to that higher critical theory, the Elohistic writer, E, the first one is J, the second one is E, wrote about 750. Okay, maybe it would help.
I know what it is based on first date.
Maybe it will be easier if I put it down on the board. Okay, the JEPD theory is just another, these are the key components in what's also known as the Wellhausen reduction and hypothesis theory. Right? So these names represent different types of writers, not individuals. Jehovistic or Yahwistic, Elohistic, priestly, and Deuteronomic, having to do with the law. Okay? So these people supposedly wrote about 850 BC, Elohistic 750 BC, the priestly writer, I've got the wrong order. JDP.
Yeah, it's DP, yeah.
DP. Okay, the Deuteronomic writer, 621 BC. I don't know how they get 21.
You want to be precise, so.
And the priestly writer, 500 BC.
Well, this is the wrong one.
Oh, this is the critical view, yes. And so, if you're talking about the date of the writing of the book of Genesis, these guys, rejecting Mosaic authorship, say that it's a combination of various people's writings within the last 1,000 years before Christ.
They, at that time, believed that there was actually no writing at the time of Moses.
Yes, that's what was one of the original assumptions.
Yeah.
How come you still carry this over to the church?
Because the reason we have to discuss it is because a lot of people still accept it, even though it's been disproved. And even preachers, like everybody that goes to a liberal seminary, they get this and they accept it. As I said in my history course in ancient historiography, the history of historical writing, this is what we got.
When you look at that, I'm surprised this week's not that old.
No, they didn't believe there was even writing any longer than that. Then they found out that there was writing from 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. They're finding the actual writing, and it's finding around the same period of time in different parts.
Well, let me just give you something out of Unger here. In his Bible handbook, in Genesis chapter 10, verse 10, I believe, let me just check that. Genesis 10:10, there is a city named 10:10. Yes, and the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Erech. Well, guess what? The archaeologists have discovered that the biblical city Erech, or kingdom, is the modern place called Warka on the lower Euphrates River in Babylon. Does everybody have any idea where that is?
Where's Euphrates?
Euphrates River is in the Fertile Crescent.
Okay.
Okay, I got to draw a map.
Oh no.
Makes maps. Yes.
Well, the only reason I like them is because it helps you understand. So we have the Promised Land over here, the eastern end of the Mediterranean. We have Palestine. We have the Red Sea coming down like this.
Yeah.
Right? Like that.
What is that we lost?
Oh, wait a sec. This is the Persian Gulf over here, and it comes in like this. And comes back out to the Indian Ocean. So you have India over here. You have Arabia, Saudi Arabia over here. This is Sinai. This is Egypt. And you have the Euphrates River and the Tigris River coming out of the Persian Gulf and going up into Mount Ararat up here. Okay? This is the Ararat Range. You've got the, I think the name of this sea, but there's the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. That's what it is. That's all. This is where the Russians are having trouble with the Armenian uprisings that have been in the news this last year in this area. Okay? Now, Ararat is somewhere down here. Alright? So Unger says that on the Euphrates River, there's a place called Warka, which is the biblical Ararat. In this place, cylinder seals were invented about 3400 BC in Wharton culture at a place called Uruk. Uruk, or the biblical Ararat. You see the similarity in the names. 3400 BC we're talking about. Got that? 3.5 millennia before Christ. Well, Moses was 1400 BC. Now we're talking about cylinder seals invented about 3400 BC in this culture at Uruk. Clay tablets dated around 3300 BC are the earliest known pictographic script in existence. It was an ancestor of cuneiform and Sumerian. Okay? So there was writing discovered 3.5 millennia BC, which was the ancestor of the cuneiform writing of Egypt and Sumerian writing of, I think it's Babylon. This proves that people were writing a long time before Moses. You understand that? The great significance of it.
Very much.
This wasn't discovered until after the JEPD theory had gained worldwide acceptance among liberal scholars.
So Unger refutes that
Warka. Warka. K-A. Okay. What would you say?
so that Unger is showing that refutes this idea?
Unger is giving evidence that the basic assumption was flawed in the JEDP theory that people couldn't even write back then.
Other than that, he refutes the idea on it, did he? Or?
Oh yeah, he has a very extensive argument if you want to read him, especially the Old Testament book about Unger. He gives very in-depth analysis of their views, what they argue and support. But the easiest, simplest argument to understand is that it's based on the fact that they didn't think, or the theory that Moses couldn't even, there's no evidence that anybody wrote Moses' day. Subsequent to that time, they discovered the evidence, which throws out their basic underlying assumption.
Yeah, how could you think that they didn't write in the day of Moses when the tablets were given to them with the laws on them? They couldn't read then either.
Well, they would just throw that into the realm of legend. You know, if there was a legend.
I know, then you must not believe anything.
Well, they don't, yeah, all these guys operate on the assumption that the Bible is not actually. I have a book here this morning I'm going to read the introduction to, that's written by a non-Christian man. And he doesn't believe that the Bible is actually the inspired Word of God. However, he has developed the highest regard that a person can have and not remain and not believe that the Bible is infallible. Anyways, the date of writing. So the critics, say that it was variously written in its present form, or in its original form in the last millennium before Christ. The conservative scholar's viewpoint is that Mosaic. Let me start that sentence over there. The conservative scholar's view is that Moses wrote the book of Genesis approximately 1500 to 1400 BC. Now you will find variation even among biblical evangelical scholars. For example, some scholars say that Moses lived and wrote 1450 to 1410. 1450 to 1410 BC. That's the 40-year period in the wilderness. You have to understand the point. The point is that Moses was born in Egypt, and he was the one that led Israel to the plains of Moab at the northeast end of the Dead Sea. In this process, which should have taken them 1 year, it's only 12 days trip from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea. Because they sinned at Kadesh Barnea, a 12-day trip turned into a 40-year trek. Right? So they spent 40 years wandering here. Finally, in the last 3 months, they were brought up here. And
that wasn't so much a wandering as it was transition.
Yes, it was a wandering deck. Sure. Like they probably encamped in 4 or 5 major spots, and they stayed there for each spot for 10 or 15 years.
The trains filled up and moved out.
Yeah. So this 40-year period is when Moses did most of his writing. I mean, he could have been writing all during this period, but this only took about a year. So this is when Moses wrote.
Russia kind of going to the
So 1450 to 1410 is considered the date of the Exodus and the wanderings by some scholars. Some scholars will put it a couple of hundred years later in the 1300s. Okay? But still, that's not bad. The critics put it about, the liberals will say, well, maybe 1000 BC. They'll drop it back a couple of centuries later, but they have a hard time going any farther. All right, so the date of writing. Let's do that. The authenticity, I'm not sure that I have that ready for you yet. But I have a reading that deals with the authenticity, and I wanted to read this just for interest's sake this morning. I don't think you need to take notes on it. But I was introduced to this book in my historiography course at the university. I found it afterwards. My dad had a copy. It's introductory. I mean, it's self-explanatory, rather. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's about 4 pages reading. Listen careful. This guy is not a Christian. He begins with a quotation from Goulais. I believe he was a German painter and philosopher. The greatest happiness of the thinking man is to have fathomed what can be fathomed, and quietly to reverence what is unfathomable. When a non-theologian writes a book about the Bible, it is a rare enough occurrence to entitle the reader to ask for some explanation of how the writer managed to make himself master of the subject. As a journalist, I have been for many years exclusively concerned with the results of modern science and research. In 1950, in the course of my routine work, I came across the reports of French archaeologists He names them on their excavations at Mari and Ugarit. Those are two highly significant excavations in the Mideast. Right? The cuneiform tablets discovered at Mari on the Euphrates River up there were found to contain biblical names. As a result, narratives of the patriarchs, that is in the Bible, these narratives, that had been for a long time regarded as merely pious tales were unexpectedly transferred into the realm of history. At Ugarit on the Mediterranean, evidence of the Canaanite worship of Baal had for the first time come to light. By a coincidence, a scroll of Isaiah discovered in a cave by the Dead Sea, this is the third location, was in the same year dated as pre-Christian. That's the earliest copy of Isaiah known in existence. When did Isaiah live? We just talked about it last night. When did he live and write? About 750 BC. Mm-hmm. Okay? That's 8 centuries before Christ. And if you have a pre-Christian copy of the scroll of Isaiah, you're talking about something that was within 600 or 700 years. It had to have been 600 or 700 years before or after it was actually written. And they never had anything up until 2,000 years prior to that discovery. Okay? So it was dated as pre-Christian. These sensational reports, and indeed in view of the significance of these finds, it is not too much to use the word sensational. These finds awakened in me the desire to come to closer grips with biblical archaeology, the most recent and generally speaking least known province in the field of investigation of the ancient world. I ransacked German and foreign literature for a good summary of the results of research. There was none. I went to the sources myself in the libraries of many lands. Aided by my wife's enthusiasm, I collected all the hitherto scientifically established results of investigations which are to be found in the learned works of biblical archaeologists. The deeper I went into the matter, the more exciting it became. The door into the historical world of the Old Testament had already been thrown open by a Frenchman by the name of Goulais in 1843. While at Khorsabad in Mesopotamia, he suddenly found himself confronted by reliefs of King Sargon II of Assyria, Isaiah's nemesis, the guy that he was predicting would come down and fight against the Jews. King Sargon II of Assyria, who ravaged Israel and led his people out into captivity. Accounts of his conqueror's campaigns deal with the conquest of Samaria, which is also described in the Bible. For a century now, American, English, French, German scholars have been digging in the Middle East, Mesopotamia, Palestine, and Egypt. All the great nations have founded institutes and schools specifically for this type of research. In Palestine, places and names that are frequently mentioned in the Bible are being brought back once more into the light of day. They look exactly as the Bible describes them. They lie exactly where the Bible locates them. On ancient inscriptions and monuments, scholars encounter more and more characters from the Old and New Testaments. Contemporary reliefs. What's a relief? Yeah, it's a carving on a wall or a post or a column, right? Any carving. Those are called reliefs. Contemporary reliefs of that day depict people whom we have hitherto known only by name from the Bible. Their features, their clothes, their armor take shape before our eyes. Colossal figures and sculptures show us the Hittites with their big noses, the slim, tall Philistines, the elegant Canaanite chiefs with their chariots of iron which struck terror into the hearts of the Israelites, the kings of Mari, contemporary with Abraham, with their gentle smiles. During the thousands of years that divide us from them, the Assyrian kings have lost nothing of their fierce and forbidding appearance. Tiglath-Pileser III, well known as the Old Testament Pope. Sennacherib, who destroyed Lachish and laid siege to Jerusalem. They have pictures of these guys. Carvings. Esarhaddon, who put King Manasseh in chains. Ashurbanipal, the great and noble ass-napper of the book of Ezra. You guys are mentioned by name. As they have done to Nineveh and Nimrod, which is biblical Kala, which is the verse we just read, or to Ashur and Thebes, which the prophets called no Ammon. The scholars have also awakened from its ancient slumber the notorious Babel, a biblical story with its legendary tower, Genesis 11. All the way to Genesis 11, they've discovered Babel. Did you know that?
No,
Did you know that they discovered the Tower of Babel?
Bottom of the page, this is the executive history book, so now I just go back to that. Oh, that's the bottom of
In the Nile Delta, down in Egypt, archaeologists have found the cities of Pithom and Ramses, where the resentful Hebrews toiled as slaves. They have laid bare strata that tell of the flames and destruction that accompanied the children of Israel in their conquering march into Canaan. In other words, they found the cities that they burned and destroyed. In Gibeah, they found Saul's mountain stronghold, the walls of which once echoed to the strains of David's harp. At Megiddo, this is northern Palestine, they came upon the vast stables of King Solomon, who had 12,000 horsemen. From the world of the New Testament reappeared the palatial edifices of King Herod. In the heart of Old Jerusalem, the pavement, the actual concrete and stone slab, was discovered where Jesus stood before Pilate, as is mentioned in John. A speleologist deciphered on the astronomical tables of the Babylonians the exact dates on which the Star of Bethlehem was observed. The Assyrians saw it, wrote it down. These breathtaking discoveries, whose significance it is impossible to grasp all at once, make it necessary for us to revise our views about the Bible. Many events that previously passed for pious tales must now be judged to be historical. I would underscore that if it was my book. Often the results of investigation correspond in detail with the biblical narratives. These investigations not only confirm but also illumine the historical situations out of which the Old Testament Gospels grew. At the same time, the changing fortunes of the ancient people of Israel are woven into a lively, colorful tapestry of daily life in the age in which they lived. They too were caught up in the political, cultural, and economic disputes of the nations and empires that struggled for power in Mesopotamia, northeast, and on the Nile, southwest, from which the inhabitants of the tiny buffer state of Palestine were never able completely to detach themselves for over 2,000 years. Point. The opinion has been and still is widely held that the Bible is nothing but the story of man's salvation, a guarantee of the validity of their faith to Christians everywhere. Now here's his view now comes out. He's not actually a Bible believer, a Christian. At the same time, it is a book about things that actually happened. Admittedly, in this sense, it has limitations in that the Jewish people wrote their history in the light of their relationship with Yahweh, which meant writing it from the point of view of their own guilt and expiation. So he's not too happy with all that other religious garbage in there. You understand?
Let's figure out the history.
Nevertheless, the events themselves are historical facts and have been recorded with an accuracy that is nothing less than startling. Thanks to the findings of the archaeologists, many of the biblical narratives can be understood better now than ever before. There are, of course, theological insights which can only be dealt with in terms of the Word of God. Interesting statement. But as Professor Perrault, the world-famous French archaeologist, has said, quote, how can we understand the Word unless we see it in its proper chronological, historical, and geographical setting? Until now, knowledge of these extraordinary discoveries was confined to a small circle of experts. He gives an example of a guy that wrote a commentary that I had downstairs that had nothing. He laughed at this guy thinking over it. No book in the whole history of mankind has had such a revolutionary influence, has so decisively affected the development of the Western world, or had such a worldwide effect as the Book of Books. Today, after 2,000 years, it has been translated into 1,120 languages and dialects, and gives no sign of having exhausted its triumphal progress. In gathering together and working over the material for this book, which I in no way claim to be complete, it seemed to me that the time had come to share with those who read their Bibles and those who do not, with churchmen and agnostics alike, The exciting discoveries which have resulted from a careful examination of the combined results of scientific investigation along many different lines. In view of the overwhelming mass of authentic and well-tested evidence now available, as I thought of the skeptical criticism from which the 18th century onward would fain have demolished the Bible altogether, there kept hammering in my brain this one sentence: the Bible was right after all.
Yeah, he denied it.
Word and tell it. Hamburg in Germany, September 1959. And this reads like a novel, this book. I think I'm going to sit down and start reading it again, or partially. This is amazing.
What the guys are doing big. They're going along one pathway they found and they stopped. So we're getting anywhere. So they decided they're going to go the other way. We've done that one for almost 2 years to do it. So it's got to be here somewhere. They went back to the other one. About 18 inches down to it.
It's sure, you know, the arguments that were given for so many years by the higher critics, etc., etc. The evidence there, just in the land alone and the buildings and that.
Now, the higher critics have gone the next step since all of this stuff came to light.
They refined their thinking.
Yes, they no longer can actually deny the existence of the historicity and integrity of the scriptures. It's the most remarkable book in the world. What they have done now is called form criticism. And they go and they say, well, the Bible is true. It tells us what happened. But the theology part has been screwed up by the believers time after time after time after time. In other words, the doctrines that were taught are legendary. It's not actually what Jesus preached.
That's what he believes.
Yeah, probably. You know, but they can't. The actual historical higher criticism has been shot right to pieces.
I think maybe they better go back and rethink their basic thinking.
And if you want to really pursue it, you know, seminaries approach this kind of stuff. Well, that's a little bit on the authenticity of the scriptures in general, which applies to the book of Genesis in particular. For many, many years, everybody thought the first 11 chapters of Genesis was nothing but myth. There was no real Adam and Eve. There was no devil. There was no Garden of Eden. There was no flood. There was no fall. There was no Seth. These so-called tables of nations were mythological, just like the Greek legends. You know, they put them all in the same category. In history, and archaeology has blown that theory right to pieces. They haven't found Adam and Eve's bones yet, and I don't think they ever will. But if they ever find the ark,
They claim they do have found, but nobody allows them there. Oh yeah, It's been found quite a few years ago. It's been recovered with ice now. It's in the mountains.
there are reports that people have seen it and gotten pieces of wood out of it and stuff.
There's people. It's controlled by Turkey and Russia right now, but there's people that have been in it. They've been right in it. Christian. I think it was Christian man. Yeah, Christian people have been right in it. Huh? He was. There's a lot of people that were involved. What do you mean? The ark? No, not that ark.
The Noah's Ark.
Oh. Yeah, I knew that. I was thinking, boy, am I ever dumb? What point didn't know that?
They found the ark.
They got pictures of it and everything.
But nobody is. They don't want to admit it's there. They don't want to. You know.
Well, empirically, it hasn't been proven because they can't. You know, modern science hasn't actually taken pictures of it and measured it and stuff. You can't go there and see it.
Well, obviously the Lord's not ready to reveal it.
I'm just waiting for the day that they find it.
When it becomes documented.
What a marvelous thing that would be to testify.
60 minutes there's a show on that.
Really?
No, I say they would.
Well, there's a group down in California called Institute for Christian Research that has sent 2 or 3 teams over there. And every time something has happened, they're not able to actually know if the weather's bad.
Okay, we killed it?
Yes.
Killed.